Before we start, kindly subscribe to my channel and tell me, where in the universe are you watching from? Jackson Thorne stood in the middle of a massive alien hall, staring up at the warriors who surrounded him. They were tall, at least 7 feet each, covered in shimmering, armored bodysuits that clung to their muscular frames. Their skin tones ranged from deep violet to icy blue, and their golden eyes glowed like fire. These were the Zyran, a race feared across the galaxy. Jackson had seen many things in his life, but nothing prepared him for this. He was here as a diplomat, sent by humanity to establish peace with the Zyran matriarchy. He had imagined long talks, careful negotiations, and maybe even a formal dinner. Instead, the moment he arrived, he had accidentally proposed to someone. It had happened so fast. 1 minute, he was being introduced to the High Council. The next, he was raising his hand in what he thought was a respectful human gesture. Big mistake. In Zyran culture, that particular motion was a marriage challenge. The room had fallen silent. Then, the tallest and fiercest warrior among them had stepped forward, General Renvera. Her long, silver-white hair flowed down her back, her dark blue skin glowing under the bright lights of the chamber. She wore battle armor that gleamed with the marks of countless victories. Her sharp gaze locked onto Jackson, studying him like a predator watching his prey. "You challenge me, human?" she asked, her voice deep and commanding. Jackson had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing. He was in trouble. "A challenge," he repeated, forcing a smile. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The warriors surrounding them murmured, exchanging glances. Renvera tilted her head. "Do you deny your own gesture?" "I didn't mean." "Then you are a coward?" she interrupted, her eyes narrowing. Jackson felt sweat forming on his brow. If there was one thing he knew about warrior cultures, it was that backing down never ended well. He took a deep breath. "Think, Jackson." A Zyran warrior was stronger than 10 human men. If he fought her in a physical battle, he would lose instantly. But if he refused, he would be seen as weak, and that would ruin any chance of negotiations. So he did what he did best. He improvised. "I don't back down from challenges," he said with confidence, straightening his posture. "But in human culture, we settle disputes in different ways." Renvera raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Jackson had no idea what he was about to say, but he went with it anyway. "A duel of minds," he said quickly, "a battle of wit and strategy. That's how true leaders prove their strength." The hall fell silent. The Zyran warriors exchanged uncertain looks. Then, to Jackson's surprise, Renvera smirked. "Very well, human," she said. "We shall see if your mind is as strong as your words." Jackson let out a breath. Step 1, survive. Step 2, figure out what he just agreed to. Jackson Thorne sat in the center of a massive stone arena, facing the most dangerous woman he had ever met, General Renvera. Around them, hundreds of Zyran warriors stood, watching in silence. Their golden eyes glowed under the blue-tinted lights, waiting for the battle to begin. Except this wasn't a physical fight. Jackson had somehow talked his way into a battle of wit and strategy, instead of hand-to-hand combat. He had no idea what that actually meant in Zyran culture, but it was better than getting punched through a wall. Renvera leaned forward, her sharp silver eyes fixed on him. "The trial of the mind begins," she declared. "We shall see if you are worthy." Jackson forced a confident smile. Worthy of what? Marriage? Respect? Not getting thrown into space? He still wasn't sure. A Zyran elder stepped forward, raising a large metal cube. Glowing symbols covered its surface, shifting like liquid fire. "The challenge is simple," the elder announced. "You must solve the trials of the cube before your opponent. The first to complete all 3 tests shall be declared the victor." Jackson swallowed. Oh, a puzzle game. He could handle that. The elder placed a cube in front of both Jackson and Renvera. The moment it touched the ground, the symbols flashed, rearranging into strange patterns. Renvera cracked her knuckles. "Prepare yourself, human." The crowd roared as the first challenge began. The first trial, the memory test. Jackson's cube lit up, displaying a rapid sequence of colors and symbols. The patterns flickered across its surface, vanishing after only a few seconds. A timer appeared above him, counting down. Oh, he had to memorize the pattern. Jackson glanced at Renvera. Her fingers flew across the cube, tapping the surface with practiced precision. She had done this before. He groaned. Of course, she has. Focusing, he closed his eyes and replayed the flashing symbols in his mind. When he opened them, he quickly tapped the cube, inputting the pattern just as the timer hit 0. A deep chime echoed. Success. Renvera finished at the exact same time. She smirked. Not bad. Human. The second trial. The logic puzzle. The cube changed again, displaying a complex series of glowing pathways. Some led to dead ends. Others formed strange patterns. Jackson quickly realized it was a maze, one that changed with every move. Renvera didn't hesitate. She tapped her cue, moving through the maze with sharp, calculated decisions. Jackson hesitated for only a moment before diving in. He quickly tested the paths, using trial and error. Each wrong move shifted the maze. Each right move made it clearer. Minutes passed. Jackson's heart pounded. He could feel the crowd's tension. Finally, his screen flashed green. He had solved it. He turned to Renvera, only to see her screen flash green at the exact same moment. Their eyes met. For a brief second, she looked almost impressed. The final trial, the impossible choice. The cube darkened. A single question appeared on its surface. You have one choice: save your people or save yourself. Jackson froze. His people. What did that mean? Was this a trick question? Renvera didn't hesitate. I choose my people. The cube flashed. Her answer was accepted. Jackson hesitated. He wasn't Zyron. His people weren't at risk. But if he hesitated too long, he'd lose. Then he understood. He tapped the cube. I choose my people. The arena fell silent. Then the elder raised his hands. The human has passed the trials. The crowd erupted in cheers. Jackson let out a slow breath, glancing at Renvera. She studied him, her sharp eyes unreadable. Then she stepped forward and placed a hand on his chest. Perhaps you are worthy after all. Jackson stood frozen as General Renvera placed a firm hand on his chest. Her golden eyes locked onto his, searching for something unseen. The crowd of Zyran warriors erupted into cheers, but Jackson barely heard them. His heart pounded. Had he actually won? The human has passed the trials, the elder repeated, raising his voice over the roaring warriors. By the laws of the Zyran matriarchy, he has proven his worth. Jackson exhaled slowly. Good. Maybe now they'd start real negotiations. Then Renvera smirked. This settles it. You are now my mate. Jackson's brain shut down. What? Renvera tilted her head, as if confused by his confusion. You challenged me. You bested the trials. You proved yourself. The law is clear. She crossed her arms, her expression pleased. You are mine now. Jackson blinked. He turned to the elder, then to the other warriors. No one looked surprised. Oh no, he had accidentally won a wife. An argument before an army. Hold on, Jackson said, stepping back slightly. I didn't agree to. Renvera's smirk vanished. Do you insult our traditions? The crowd fell silent. The weight of 100 sharp-eyed warriors focused on Jackson at once. Jackson rubbed the back of his neck, not insulting, just clarifying. Renvera frowned. You claim victory, yet now you hesitate. Do humans fear commitment? Jackson threw up his hands. We usually go on a date first, maybe 2, maybe 100 before marriage. Renvera raised an eyebrow. 100 trials. How inefficient. Jackson groaned. That's not. Never mind. The elder cleared his throat. The human must accept, or he dishonors the general before the matriarchy. Jackson's stomach dropped. Great. Say no. Offend an entire warrior race. Say yes, and... He glanced at Renvera. She was tall, fierce, and terrifyingly beautiful. Her long silver hair framed her sharp features, and despite her battle-hardened nature, there was an undeniable fire in her eyes, a fire that now burned for him. He had no idea what he was getting into, but there was no way out. Jackson sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine, I accept. The honeymoon from hell. The moment he agreed, the warriors cheered loudly. Renvera grinned, gripping his wrist. The bonding ritual begins at once, she announced. Jackson tensed. Bonding what now? She gestured to the elder. As tradition demands, we shall be tested as mates. A large metal door at the side of the arena slammed open. Beyond it, Jackson saw a ship. The elder nodded. You will be sent to the trial moon. If you survive together, your bond is true. Jackson paled. Survive. Renvera looked far too excited. Yes, a week alone on a hostile world, a perfect way to strengthen our connection. Jackson wanted to scream. Crash landing into chaos. Hours later, Jackson sat in a cramped shuttle, gripping the armrests as they plummeted through an alien planet's atmosphere. Renvera sat beside him, perfectly calm. Try not to die, human, she teased. I'd hate to win a weak mate. Jackson glared at her. You planned this, didn't you? She smirked. Perhaps. The ship shook violently as it broke through the clouds. Jackson looked out the window and saw a jungle filled with glowing creatures, towering trees. And was that lava? The ship's alarms blared. Jackson groaned. This was going to be the worst honeymoon in history. Jackson gritted his teeth as the shuttle plunged toward the jungle below. The alarms screamed in his ears. Outside the window, flashes of fire streaked past as the ship's outer hull heated from re-entry. This is fine, he muttered to himself. Totally fine. Across from him, General Renvera looked completely unbothered, arms crossed as if they weren't seconds away from slamming into the ground at terminal velocity. Stop whining, human, she said, glancing at him. If you die before we land, I'll be very disappointed. Jackson shot her an exasperated look. Oh, sorry, I left my crash-proof bones back on Earth. Before she could reply, the shuttle hit the ground, hard. The impact sent Jackson flying forward, his seatbelt straining against him. Metal groaned, and outside, massive alien trees snapped like twigs as the ship skidded across the jungle floor. Then, silence. Jackson opened his eyes, his heart hammering. The ship had come to a stop, half buried in thick, glowing foliage. Smoke curled from the consoles, and the only light came from flickering emergency panels. A low groan came from beside him. Jackson turned to see Renvera already standing, stretching her arms as if she had just woken up from a nap. She smirked. Not bad. You're still alive. Jackson unbuckled himself with a sigh. Barely. Stranded with a warrior bride. Jackson climbed out of the wreckage, stepping onto the damp alien soil. His boots sank slightly into the mossy ground, which glowed faintly beneath his feet. The air smelled strange, like a mix of citrus and burning wood. Towering trees surrounded them, their bark a deep midnight blue, their leaves glowing in shades of purple and green. Strange insect-like creatures buzzed through the air, their wings humming softly. Jackson sighed. Great. A jungle full of things that probably want to eat me. Renvera strode past him, scanning their surroundings with a hunter's gaze. Good. It will make the trial more interesting. Jackson blinked. You're enjoying this, aren't you? She smirked. Of course. He ran a hand down his face. I don't suppose you packed food, water, or, I don't know, a survival guide. Renvera rolled her shoulders. We do not need them. She pointed at him. You are my mate now. You must prove your strength. Jackson groaned. Oh, for the love of, I'm an engineer, not a survival expert. She raised an eyebrow. Then you will adapt, or die. Jackson squinted at her. You're really romantic, you know that? She grinned. I accept your compliment. The first challenge. Hungry hunters. Before Jackson could argue, a deep growl rumbled from the shadows. His spine stiffened. What was that? Renvera's golden eyes narrowed. Something hungry. The bushes rustled, and 3 massive creatures stepped forward. Each beast stood 8 feet tall, their bodies covered in black armored plates. They had 4 glowing eyes, long spiked tails, and clawed limbs built for tearing flesh. Jackson stiffened. Those look very not friendly. Renvera pulled out her blade, her smirk widening. Perfect, a proper test. Jackson took a very careful step back. Wait, you're running toward them. She charged forward with a battle cry, slashing at the closest beast. It roared in fury. Jackson groaned. Yep, I'm definitely gonna die. Then, the second creature lunged. Right at him. The massive creature lunged at Jackson, its razor-sharp claws slicing through the air. Jackson's instincts screamed at him to move, and he barely managed to dive to the side before the beast's attack shattered the ground where he had been standing. Oh, come on, he yelled, scrambling to his feet. Why does everything here want to kill me? The creature turned, its 4 glowing eyes locking onto him. It snarled, baring rows of jagged teeth, and charged again. Jackson did the only thing he could think of. He ran. Renvera's battle. A few feet away, Renvera fought like a storm. Her blade flashed, slicing through the thick armor of one beast's shoulder. The creature shrieked in pain, but she didn't stop. She moved with precision, dodging its tail, twisting around its claws, always attacking, never hesitating. Jackson risked a glance at her. She was terrifying, and kind of amazing. Then he heard heavy footsteps. His own monster was still chasing him. Oh, right, still dying, he muttered, outsmarting the beast. Jackson darted behind a thick, glowing tree, his mind racing. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't strong like Renvera. But he was smart. He spotted a large root sticking out of the ground, twisted and strong, like a natural tripwire. An idea hit him. He grabbed a nearby rock and threw it at the beast's head. The monster roared in fury, charging at him full speed. Jackson waited, just a second longer, then dove out of the way. The creature's massive legs hit the root at full speed. It tripped. The beast crashed face first into the dirt, its armored body slamming into a tree with a loud thud. Jackson rolled onto his back, breathing hard. Ha! He pointed at the dazed creature. Take that, ugly. Victory. Almost. Before Jackson could celebrate, the last beast lunged at him from behind. His stomach dropped. He had no time to move. Then, a silver blur streaked past him. HFY. Renvera's blade pierced straight through the creature's skull. It twitched once, then collapsed, unmoving. Jackson slowly turned to see Renvera standing over him, her golden eyes gleaming with amusement. You fight, strangely, she said. Jackson pushed himself up, still panting. Yeah, well, you fight like a crazy person. She grinned, a compliment. Jackson shook his head, muttering, this marriage is gonna kill me. A warrior's approval. Renvera studied him for a moment, then nodded. You are not useless after all. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Wow, thanks, honey. She ignored his sarcasm. You think quickly. You adapt. She tilted her head. Perhaps you will survive this trial. Jackson exhaled. Let's hope so. Renvera glanced at the fallen creatures, then turned toward the jungle. We move. The trial is not over. Jackson groaned but followed. As they disappeared into the glowing wilderness, he had one thought. This was only the beginning. Jackson stumbled over a root, barely managing to keep his balance. His boots sank into the damp alien soil, and his clothes were soaked in sweat from the humid jungle air. How much longer? He groaned. Renvera didn't even glance back. She moved like a predator, silent, strong, and completely unbothered by the harsh terrain. The trial moon has many dangers, she said. Stopping is foolish. Jackson sighed. Stopping is survival. My legs are about to quit on me. Renvera finally turned, raising an eyebrow. Your body is weak. Untrained. Jackson wiped his forehead. Yeah, well, I don't see a jungle gym anywhere to fix that. She frowned, then, without warning, grabbed his wrist and pulled him forward. Jackson yelped. Whoa, whoa, what are you? She tossed him over her shoulder like a sack of grain. Jackson blinked. His feet were no longer on the ground. You are actually carrying me. Renvera smirked. You are too slow. Jackson groaned. This is humiliating, yet efficient. Jackson covered his face. Just wake me up when we get there. The storm comes. After what felt like an hour, Renvera finally set Jackson down near a rocky outcrop. He stretched his sore arms, muttering about his pride being ruined forever. Then, a deep rumble rolled through the air. Jackson frowned. That didn't sound like an animal. Renvera glanced at the sky. Her golden eyes narrowed. "A storm," she said. Jackson looked up. Massive dark clouds swirled above, flashing with violet lightning. The wind picked up fast, rustling the jungle. Jackson tensed. "That doesn't look like a normal storm." "It is not." Renvera's voice was calm, but serious. "The trial moon is unstable. We must find shelter." Before Jackson could reply, a bolt of violet lightning struck a tree nearby. The tree exploded into shards. Jackson jumped. "Yeah, okay, shelter sounds great. Let's go." Taking cover, they ran toward the rocks, searching for cover. The wind howled, kicking up glowing dust that stung Jackson's eyes. Then Renvera pointed. There, a small cave entrance was hidden between the rocks. Without hesitation, she pulled Jackson inside just as another lightning strike shattered the ground behind them. Jackson leaned against the cool stone wall, catching his breath. "This honeymoon keeps getting better." Renvera smirked. "You jest, but this is good training." Jackson shot her a look. "Training for what? Dying in new and exciting ways?" She chuckled. "For survival." An unexpected moment. The storm raged outside, thunder shaking the ground. The cave was small, barely enough space for both of them. Jackson sat against the wall, watching the lightning dance outside. His body ached, but he was too exhausted to care. Renvera sat beside him, her silver hair catching the glow from the storm. She studied him for a moment. "You are different from Zyran males," she said. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "I'd hope so." She tilted her head. "They are silent, obedient. You speak too much." Jackson smirked. "Yeah, well, humans call that having a personality." She huffed in amusement. For the first time, Jackson noticed something. She wasn't just fierce, she was curious, interested, not just in the trial, in him. For the first time, he wondered, was this really just about survival? The storm raged outside for what felt like hours, the howling wind and violent lightning shaking the cave walls. Jackson tried to rest, but the hard ground and his aching muscles made it impossible. Renvera, however, sat perfectly still, watching, listening, waiting. Finally, the wind died down. The flashes of violet light faded, leaving only the soft hum of the jungle outside. Jackson exhaled. Well, that was fun. Renvera stood, stretching. "The trial continues." Jackson groaned. "Of course, it does." She offered her hand. "Come, the last challenge awaits." Jackson eyed her hand before taking it, pulling himself up. "I swear, if it's another monster, I'm quitting this marriage." She smirked. "You would not dare." A city in the jungle. They left the cave and pushed through thick vines until the jungle suddenly ended. Jackson blinked. What? Before them stood a massive alien city carved into the mountains. The buildings were sleek yet ancient, made of dark stone with glowing red veins pulsing through them. Towers stretched high, disappearing into the mist. Jackson whistled. Did not expect this. Renvera nodded. "This is the trial's end." Jackson glanced at her. "And what exactly are we ending here?" She turned to him, her golden eyes serious. "Your fate will be decided." Jackson sighed. "Oh, great, no pressure." The final test. As they walked into the city, Jackson noticed warriors in red and black armor watching them from the shadows. Their piercing yellow eyes followed his every move. Then, a deep gong sounded. The warriors stepped forward, forming a circle around them. Jackson's stomach twisted. "Okay, I officially hate this." Renvera faced the tallest warrior, a scared man with a heavy blade on his back. "This human has completed the trial," she declared. The warrior studied Jackson. His face showed no emotion. "The final test remains," he said. Jackson groaned. "Why am I not surprised?" The warrior drew his blade and pointed it at Jackson. "You must prove you are worthy." Jackson blinked. Of what? Not dying. Renvera looked at him. Of being my mate. Jackson paled. Wait, this is about me marrying you. Renvera smirked. Of course. Did you think we crashed here by accident? Jackson threw his hands up. Yes, I 100% thought that. The warriors laughed. A deep, rumbling sound. Renvera stepped close. Her voice softened. Fight, Jackson. Win, or they will not let you leave. Jackson swallowed hard. No pressure, huh? The warrior raised his blade. Begin. Jackson's smartest fight yet. Jackson didn't even have time to think. The warrior charged, swinging his blade down fast. Jackson dodged, barely, the wind from the strike cutting past his face. Okay, he muttered. Big guy, big sword, don't get hit. The warrior came again, fast, precise. Jackson wasn't strong, but he was quick. He ducked, rolled, dodged, just barely staying alive. The warriors watching began to murmur. Renvera smirked. Clever. Jackson's mind raced. He couldn't win in strength, but he could outthink him. As the warrior swung again, Jackson ducked low and grabbed a handful of jungle dirt. Then he threw it into the warrior's face. The warrior stumbled back, coughing. Jackson took his chance. He grabbed a loose piece of metal from the ground and swung it like a bat, smashing it against the warrior's leg. The warrior collapsed to one knee. Jackson stepped back, panting. The circle of warriors fell silent. Then the scared warrior grinned. He laughed. The human fights like a beast. Renvera stepped forward. He is my mate. The warrior nodded. Then he is worthy. Jackson let out a huge sigh of relief. Oh, thank God. Renvera turned to him, proud, amused, and something else. Affection. Jackson blinked. Did she actually like him now? Whatever it was, he was too tired to argue. For now, he had won. Jackson stood in the center of the warrior circle, still catching his breath. His arms felt like jelly, his legs burned, and his head was spinning. But he had won. The scared warrior clapped a heavy hand on Jackson's shoulder, nearly knocking him over. The human has spirit, a fighter's heart. Jackson gave a weak thumbs up. Glad you think so. The warriors let out a deep cheer, pounding their fists against their chests. Jackson blinked. They actually accepted him. Renvera stepped beside him. She looked pleased, maybe even proud. You fought well, she said. Jackson smirked. You mean I survived? She chuckled. That is the same thing here. The feast of victory. Soon, Jackson found himself seated at a long stone table in the heart of the alien city. Torches burned, filling the air with rich, spicy scents from the feast before him. Giant roasted creatures, glowing fruits, and drinks that shimmered like liquid fire. Warriors laughed loudly, sharing stories of their past battles. Jackson poked at a purple meat slab on his plate. So, this isn't gonna kill me, right? Renvera smirked. Only if you are weak. Jackson sighed. You really enjoy terrifying me, don't you? She didn't deny it. Taking a deep breath, Jackson cut into the meat and took a bite. To his surprise, it was delicious. His eyes widened. Oh, that's actually good. Renvera chuckled. You have earned your place here. You must eat like a warrior. Jackson swallowed. So, does this mean I passed? She studied him for a moment. You have proven yourself. The warriors see your worth. She paused, then added, I see your worth. Jackson nearly choked on his drink. Did she just compliment him? A new life, maybe. Later that night, Jackson and Renvera stood at the edge of the city, looking over the misty jungle. The stars above were unfamiliar, alien, and beautiful. Jackson sighed. So, what now? Renvera crossed her arms. You are my mate now. Jackson raised an eyebrow. And what exactly does that mean? She smirked. It means you belong here. Jackson looked at the towering city, the glowing jungle, the warriors who had nearly killed him, but now respected him. A week ago, he was just a stranded pilot. Now, he was something more. He glanced at Renvera. Fierce, strong, but also different now, softer. At least with him. He grinned. Guess I could get used to this. She chuckled. You will have to. As the moonlight bathed the city, Jackson realized this crazy, terrifying, ridiculous journey? It was only the beginning, and somehow he was okay with that.